Well, I'm excited to be having this conversation with you guys. Again, for those of you that are watching this, you might be watching this on a Sunday or you may be watching this after the fact. But again, the purpose of this kind of panel discussion is to give perspective. I think so often when people think about the topic of racism, it's something they see on TV. It's something that they see on social media. It's something that their one uncle does. But so rarely we kind of make it internalize and say, well, how do I play into this? And is it happening around me? Is it happening in our local context? So I wanted to sit with you guys. So Philip Brilliant, where do you,
Yeah, so I'm Phil Brilliant. I'm the president of Congregation B'nai Israel here in Toms River.
Awesome.
We're a conservative synagogue. And on the president's side, as I said before, I run the business.
Okay.
So I'm not the religious leader. I leave that to the rabbi and to the cantor.
Yeah.
But I run the business operations, and really I interact with every congregant. We have 240 families. I interact with the township. I interact with all of our neighbors. Really covering the aspects that we all deal with every day, but from the non-religious side.
Okay.
But I do go to synagogue.
Okay.
I do go to service.
Cool. And Juan Mendez.
Yeah, and I enjoyed your service as well.
I remember you being there.
I serve in addiction recovery out in Whiting, New Jersey for the last 124 years. We've been battling.
You look good.
We been battling, grappling with addictions for a long time. Now we were dealing with men and now dealing with women as well, working, helping them through it. I operate as the director of the men's program. In that, I run groups, meetings, one-on-one counseling mentor, and just kind of the day-to-day operations of everything we do. And so we're located in Whiting, New Jersey. The organization is called America's Keswick.
Cool. Awesome. So we're just going to dump in the deep end of the pool. Again, there's really no way to sugarcoat when we're talking about these topics of like racism and racial issues. So from both of your perspectives, let's just go with this. Has there ever been a time in our local context where you feel like maybe you or your family has ever experienced racism from either your skin color or your nationality? So maybe talk about a little bit about that.
We diving right in?
Yeah, we're just going deep end.
Right into deep
We'll start from the left.
Yeah.
Well, when you talk about racism, it's like you said, it's a fine line. It's a long line.
Yeah.
Where extremes. Sometimes it can be overt, where it's just right in your face, and sometimes it can be covert, where it could be unconscious to the individual, or it's more subtle. And so I experienced it. I've been in this area for 15 years, so I experienced both in some regards. And so when you talk about overt, it was right in your face. Being Hispanic and African American, Hispanic and Black, I've heard it on both sides of the coin.
Yeah.
I've been called the N-word. I've been called what they would say like a spick. Yeah. That's a term for Spanish.
Yeah.
So I've been called those type of words very overtly. Also, here's the interesting thing about racism. Since I'm also Spanish and Black, I've been with a lot of Latinos who share things about African Americans and Blacks. Yeah. And I've been around a lot of Blacks who share things about Latino. Right. So it's not always what you think. It's even minority to minority when it comes to racism. Yeah. And so overt, that's overt, but covert ways are like this. Since I work in addiction recovery, most of my clients or clientele or people we deal with have legal issues. And a lot of times we got to end up in courtrooms and in situations. So interesting, right across the street, we have the courtroom. Yep. And I had to take some guys to probation. And sometimes they're Caucasian, sometimes they're well-dressed, the guys that I take with me. And when I go to the desk, it's almost as I am the guy on probation. And I actually had somebody ask me that. Yeah. Are you taking your client to probation? Yeah. And I was actually the guy taking the client to probation. And so I don't know if that was a conscious thing. Yeah. At that point, it could have been just like a quiet bias in that individual's life. So, yeah, I've experienced both.
And that's, I think, one of the things we've been talking about is this subtle idea of our assumptions, right? We don't even sometimes know where our assumptions come from. It comes from the things we watch, to the conversations we have, to the families we were brought up in. So we enter into moments like that, really acting foolishly and like idiots, entering into maybe a racist scenario off a bad assumption. So, and I think that's where I really want to challenge our people watching this, is to really look inside their hearts and say, where are the areas where I'm not even aware that I might be doing things like that based on really poor, ungodly assumptions. So what about you?
Yeah, and you talk about the families that we grew up in, and we don't consider ourselves to be racist. We don't think about some of the things we may have said 40 years ago that were commonplace.
Yeah.
I mean, my perfect example I always talk about is I remember watching every week All in the Family. Okay? I mean, if you watch All in the Family today, there is no more racist show in the world.
Yeah.
But that was commonplace. And things have changed. And I grew up, I've only been in Toms River for about 30 years, 27 we figured out. And I grew up in New Brunswick. So I went actually Franklin Township, just outside New Brunswick. And, it was a school that was predominantly minorities. And so to me, everybody was equal. We never talked about things. Now, I heard the N-word, but that was really, two African Americans to each other, because they use it all the time,
As a substitute for
as substitute for the words. Yes, yeah. So to me, I never thought twice. It's just what it was. And school ended at noon, and you went home for lunch, because if you got a crowd of people together of mixed ethnic backgrounds, you had riots. So we didn't have lunch. And that was how I grew up, and I've learned things are different.
Yeah.
And coming to Toms River and raising a family in Toms River, there's different types of racism. And, you said before, it's ethnic, it's color of skin and everything. On the Jewish side, it's very interesting, because I remember, having people throw pennies at me because Jews are cheap.
Yeah.
My daughters, now my two oldest daughters are actually Christian, because my ex-wife was not Jewish, and my youngest daughter was raised Jewish. And the divide between the two, they could be on the same bus, and people threw pennies at my daughter here in Toms River.
Yeah.
And this is going back 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
What we've seen today in Toms River is we've seen people have an overt opinion of the Jewish migration into Toms River. And when I say migration, the north part of Toms River, North Dover, is predominantly Orthodox Jewish now.
Yeah.
Now I'm conservative Jewish.
Right.
I don't go to Orthodox synagogues on Saturday, and they don't come to mine. We're different in that manner. If there's a house for sale on my street and an Orthodox family comes and looks at it, my neighbors are gathered in the street, and I go, hey, what's going on? They're like, oh, they're moving into our neighborhood. And I'm like, who's moving into our neighborhood? And they're like, the Jews. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm Jewish. They're like, not you're Jewish. They're Jewish.
Right.
And I'm like, but we're all one and the same.
Yeah.
So, you talk about overt, you talk about open, you talk about covert, it's out there, and people don't even realize it.
Yeah.
The famous saying, if you want somebody to give you a better price,
Yeah.
you Jew them down. I mean, I've had people say that to me. I own my own business, and I'm like, I can't believe you just said that to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But people don't think twice sometimes about
Right.
what hurts others.
Yeah.
And that is one of our biggest problems.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like, again, even a moment like a video like this is to really cause us to go, oh, like, maybe I need to slow my words down. Maybe I need to process the things I'm saying and really take some self-evaluation. Like, where are comments like that coming from, right? And I think that's everyone on multiple different levels needs to take a time to do that. So now let's go a step further. Again, I'm going to assume that many watching this video are from the Christian church. For both of you, have you ever experienced racism from inside of the Christian church?
Well, look around every Sunday morning. I just realized how segregated we are.
Yeah.
And I got to say, preferences, own convictions, that I look around my church and a lot of people look like me. And everybody this morning, if you look around, you'll probably say most people look like me in church. And yeah, the sad thing is, with like many issues, if these issues are not dealt with, they will manifest themselves in the church. The church doesn't automatically wipe out the fact that you have issues.
Yeah.
And we know that. Right?
Yep.
And so, yes, I have experienced it. Here's a couple ways I've experienced it. The assumption that we worship a little different, right? Maybe it's a little different. Sometimes they even said that my worship is a little wrong.
Right.
Maybe because our expression of worship is very active and creative. Some would say it's emotionalism. But I find that interesting because my counterparts, I know plenty white churches that I go to that has just as much energy.
Yep.
So it's almost like discounting their energy in the way they worship. And so I've had people say, well, worship like those churches, and don't realize I go to one of those churches.
Yeah.
And also to discount the fact that not only one ethnicity get to worship like that, and it's not always just about emotions.
Yeah.
It's just about the way people express their love for God, and the way they express it might look a little different. So I experienced that firsthand.
Yeah.
About the way those guys worship, and it's emotional. And
Yeah.
African Americans can be emotional. Latinos are emotional,
Right.
when they come to worship.
Yeah. It's again, I've heard that too, but then I've gotten to see through the eyes of my brother, who has gone to an African American church, and see the energy and the passion, the love they have for God. And frankly, there's sometimes I walk in and I'm jealous of, like, I wish our churches, our white churches, would have that passion and energy, but it's amazing how it gets discounted because of your skin color. It's like, it's not the way we do it. Last week we had a talk about this idea of us versus them. And what's interesting is, like, you could, even in this circle, it could be us because we have the same faith, and them. Or it could be we're different because you worship, maybe your style of worship in your church is a little. And so we have such a tendency to do this us versus them, but we're all made in the image of God, and it's us. There isn't an us versus them mentality, and how really sad when we let that creep into our heart. So Philip, what?
Yeah, well, I was going to say too is, unfortunately, over my 10-year period as president, we've had a lot of tragedies in this country. We've had the shooting in Charleston in a church. We had the shooting in Pittsburgh in a synagogue, in California at a synagogue, around the world. The world has changed from maybe when we grew up as kids. Actually, you're younger than me too. But anyway, yeah, he's a young guy.
Yeah.
To think that we have services with security guards. But we've held vigils in our front lawn every time something has happened in America that we need to come together. And we all come together.
Right.
And we all have different beliefs. We pray differently. But, it's unfortunate that when it's tragedy, we come together.
Unify. Yeah.
And we unify.
Yeah.
There has to be a way to get past that. That the color of our skin, and again, religion is different.
Yeah.
I will give it that.
Yeah.
But other than just tragedy, we need to be able to come together to enjoy the good, to pray together. And, people pray in different tongues. They pray in different buildings. And, but there has to be a way to do that, because if we don't, we just keep dividing.
Yeah.
And, we're not talking politics, but in a country that's divided, religion is one of the things to bring us all back together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely what it is. Of course, I forgot the question. So I'm going to remind me again.
Racism from someone maybe inside of the Christian church.
So, unfortunately, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years ago, Tom's River Strong became a nasty saying. Okay. We had, the Tom's River, the Orthodox Jewish community moving into North Dover, and people don't like change.
Right.
I've lived in this neighborhood for 20 years. This is my house. I don't like the neighborhood changing. Okay. Whether you want to talk about blockbusting, and if that's in North Dover, if that's in Long Island, or that's in other areas that have happened based upon race, based upon religion, in Tom's River, this Tom's River Strong became something that was nasty. And, and it really got shown in public meetings when the Chabad here in town, and Chabad, I'm always trying to figure out the best way to describe what Chabad is. So I'm a conservative Jew. You have Orthodox, and then you have Chabad. Now, he practiced similar to Orthodox, Rabbi Garari, but he welcomes everybody. Okay. It doesn't matter your race, your religion. You are always welcomed into his synagogue to pray. And he will wrap tefillin with you, the prayers on your arms, because they're an outward going organization that makes sure that they reach people of every race and religion. Well, he had a building that was a non-conformance use here in Toms River. Okay. And the anger that was put out by the residents of Toms River on social media and in a packed house at Toms River High School North Auditorium that I didn't know where I was living. And, I'm not going to say it was the Christian community. I'm not going to say it was the Jewish community. I'm not going to say it was the black community. It was Toms River. Right. And everybody came together against, this individual, but it was really against the bigger purpose of different people moving into our town. Yeah. And when you talk about, Judaism being 2% of the population in this country, and probably, I don't know how, maybe we've grown a little in Toms River, but it's a very small percentage, when all these people come out, you feel threatened. Yeah. And then you look on Facebook and you realize that these social medias, that these are people, your neighbors, your kids go to school with, and then you're wondering where you're living. So I don't want to say it was directly the Christian community, right, but it was the entire Toms River community. Yeah. And I'd like to think that we've all learned our lessons from that. Yeah. And we want to be a community again.
Well, one of the things, our senior leader, Jason, went to a town hall meeting. And I remember this conversation for us, even as a church having this series, started about 1.5 years ago, where he was in a town hall meeting and hearing some of the experiences of some of our Jewish brothers and sisters have had in this community wrecked him. Because they were very forthright of the racism that they've experienced. And it was like, we can't let this go in our church. Like because again, you can always point fingers, but for us, this is a conversation we need to have because this is not, we know how we're supposed to be living and acting. And so that's why this is such an important conversation.
Yeah, and I appreciate Wellspring and, the time that we're taking to discuss things like this, because a lot of times we don't know how people feel. Nobody knows the talks that I had with my grandmother and her experience from the South. Yeah. Nobody had the talk with your family members or your congregations. And it's like an educational piece. Yeah. It's like I'm learning today about your experiences, and now I have a different perspective to add on my perspective when I think about the Jewish community. Yeah. And so I thank you for, just having this time, space to be able to educate myself in order to learn.
Yeah, and I think it's great to bring everybody together, and I think it's also important, when you do it on a Sunday morning, or people may watch it afterwards, that they sit down with their family and they watch it. Yeah. And there's an open discussion, because it can't just end when the TV goes off. Right. It has to be something that we do every day and that we're sensitive to, and that because that's how you stop the people from walking up to somebody else and saying something inappropriate. Yeah. Think twice before you speak. And, so I think it's something, we talk about how much less time we have at home these days with our kids. My kids are grown up, but, the days that we have, especially during a pandemic, where people are homeschooling, and you have all your kids, this is the time to really start, setting forth that attitude so that people understand that you can hurt somebody with a word. Yeah. And you talked about what Jason saw at the town hall meeting. I listened to the stories of, some of the, Orthodox members of our community going to synagogue on Saturday morning. They all walk. They don't drive, and having hot coffee thrown in their face, rocks, people swerving at them on the road where they think they're going to get hit. And there are large families walking with their kids in strollers. To think that in our community, people threaten people like that. Yeah. And it has to start at home. Yep. It has to be in every religious institution in our town, in our community, and further on. Yeah. But we have to keep that going. Yeah.
So that's an amazing transition for our last question. And that's so often when we think about the topic of racial bias and racism, it feels so big, especially when you look at the news, so overwhelming. What's, from your guys' perspective, what's maybe one practical thing someone who's watching this, can do to say, hey, I'm gonna take a step in the right direction. I'm gonna do this. What's one practical step someone can take?
This.
Yeah.
I believe this is a practical step. Sitting down across from somebody that's different than you, that looks different than you, that talks different than you, and learning and growing from their experiences, what they have to offer. Another thing, a practical example, I've learned as a counselor that people have biases. People have internal messages that they probably not aware of. And so maybe you clearly, I'm just going to keep it clean. Some people are clearly racist. That's just what it is. That's just the world we live in. I don't want to minimize that. But then there's another group of people that don't even know that there are some biases that they struggle with. And so what we learned in counseling is like doing self-care to understand your own biases, uncovering them, and so they won't hinder relational issues. And so, just uncovering biases, hidden messages in your own self, and also sitting down with somebody in this forum, learning, growing, developing somebody else's experiences and understanding.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I second that. I agree 100%. I think it's more of this.
Yeah.
People have to talk. Okay. I remember you grew up. You knew every one of your neighbors. Okay. You needed some sugar. You went to your neighbor. People had coffee. People were hanging out together in their driveways. We don't do that anymore. We stay in our houses. Again, we're in the middle of a pandemic. What else you expect? But even without a pandemic, we don't do those things anymore. I think we need to know our neighbors. We need to get out and we need to reach people and really interact. And I'll say it once, I'll say it again. My kids are older, but I had an opportunity this summer to drive cross country with my youngest daughter because she moved to Denver, Colorado. Okay, since she played softball 6 years ago when she retired. We have never spent that much time together just talking. It was a great 32 hours. At least I think so. You'll have to ask her. But it was great to be able to find out who she is again.
Yeah.
Because she's changed. Okay. We all have this time, unfortunately, because of this pandemic. But whether we're taking our kids to soccer, or whether we're going to church, or whether we're just sitting home having dinner as a family for the first time because now we can, the conversation has to happen about life, about community. Turn the TV off for a few minutes because there's nothing to watch anyway, And I think that is where it really has to be and has to start. I've been the first person to say that this pandemic is going to be solely based on human nature and what people are willing to do and what people are willing to leave their house for. It goes the other way too. When you're staying at home, what are you teaching at home? And using that time valuably to be able to interact with your kids, your family, your grandparents. And, we've created this new thing called Zoom. I wish I bought stock in it. You reach people around the world.
Yeah.
Reach out and touch someone like they used to say.
Cool. Well, I want to thank you both for sitting down and having this conversation. I think this conversation is going to be valuable because, like you said, conversations like them bring perspective. So many of us sit in our bubble. We know our five facts, and so little do we ever expand that. So sitting down and getting different perspectives, I hope and pray, are going to help people move in the right direction in loving thy neighbor. So again, thank you, Philip. Thank you, Juan. And
thanks for having me.
Cool. All right.